Hello and welcome to another pattern recognition video. So I try to do at least 10 problems, and today we have vulnerable king patterns. And with pattern recognition, you want to make sure that you choose a set of problems, and instead of just going over them once and forgetting them, go over them one time nice and slow, and then the second time go over them a little bit faster. Maybe time yourself and reduce the amount of time that you take for each problem. And if you do that about 7 times through these problems, by the 7th time you'll be zipping through them. You'll be able to go and solve these problems, in probably 10, 15 seconds or something, because they'll be burned into your long-term memory. So this being vulnerable king problems or patterns, you want to look at all the checks first, as they are the most forcing moves. And in any tactics or when you're playing your own games, remember checks, captures, and threats in that order. Before you move, look for those checks, captures, and threats. Once your opponent moves, you might find that he's left himself open like this. We just had a capture. But if we look at the checks, now of course we don't want to check here because then our queen could just be captured, but we have another check. So hopefully you found the answer. Pause the video at any time if you need more time to think. But this one should be a little more obvious. The possible check here, and you're going to fork the king and the queen. So here we go. Check, and we can knock out that queen. So I hope you found that one. That was rated 661. Good for beginners. And when you're trying to recognize patterns, you want easier problems. The more difficult they get, the more it kind of goes into calculation ability and practicing calculation. So here we go on to the next one. An attack on the bishop here, which is under attack, but we have a battery lined up on the king, so maybe we can take advantage of that in some way. Let's see here. And the theme is vulnerable king patterns. So the king is kind of vulnerable here with this battery lined up on the king. Even though the knight is blocking and the bishop is protecting, we do have another rook lined up on the open file. So that's a possibility. Maybe we knock the bishop out, the defender of that knight. So, that's something to look at. Now here, we want to look at checks first. So you want to double check, should you capture here? Well, if you do that, the bishop will just recapture and target the queen. And are there any other captures, any other checks? So look at checks first, then captures, then threats. So the check doesn't look like it has a good follow through, but maybe if we knock out this bishop first. So a capture of the bishop, rook could recapture, but then we go ahead and fork here. We'll fork rook and king. The king could move to defend, or maybe even come forward and let the other rook defend. But either way, it looks like we're going to be giving up a rook and a bishop for a knight, bishop, and rook. So we'll go ahead in material. So here we go. Capture, fork, and then we can go ahead and capture here. So we come out ahead a knight there, using the vulnerable king pattern. And always check for attacks on the king first. So let's move on to the next problem. Here we just had a pawn captured, pinning the knight to our queen. So we are looking, as black to move here, we're looking for vulnerable king patterns. And this is interesting because it doesn't look like white's king is vulnerable at all. It almost looks like black has a vulnerable king here. With the white pieces swarming around. So maybe we knock out the queen here. So is that what we're looking for? With black pieces, black to move here. We could take their queen, because if we don't, both of our rooks are under attack. So we go after the queen. And if they capture our queen, well, then we can take out the knight. And if they don't capture our knight, well, let's see. We'll take one more look at it. So knight captures. So we took their queen. They're almost forced to take our queen. Then we can take their knight. And then if they take back, well, then our king can just pick off their bishop. So it looks like we're going to come out ahead in this. So we just pick that off, and then now we can take the bishop. All right. Well, I don't know. There it was a vulnerable king theme, but it was almost like defense. So we were trying to defend against our king being kind of vulnerable. All right. Let's see what the next problem is here. Okay. So a capture there. Was that a rook being captured? Okay, well, no matter what, hopefully you found this one. So with black to move, what would you play here? This one should be fairly simple if you just look for checks first. And hopefully you'll notice the queen attack here. So there we go. A nice little pattern. And that is a good pattern when you have a rook or a queen lined up on the king and the bishop is able to move here, and the pawn could not capture that bishop because the rook or queen lined up on the king would pin that pawn. So here we have the nice bishop and queen mate pattern. All right, knight has jumped forward, forking two pieces here. What do we have? Well, do we have a way to win here? All right. Well, we're looking for vulnerable king patterns. And one big part of that is to look at checks first. So we have quite a few checks with the white pieces here. If we go here, rook to f8 will be captured by their rook. If we go here, the king could capture us, or the knight. So what other checks do we have? Bishop here. The rook could capture us. Now we could go here, but the king can step over and kind of fork both pieces here, although the rook could drop back, protecting the bishop and taking a pawn. But remember, we still have this knight forking our pieces. So we need something better. So let's look at this knight. The knight can check here or here. Here will be captured by the rook. So if we go here, we'll check the king. The king will be forced. Now remember, when a king is under attack, there are 3 or less options. The king will have to capture the attacker, run from the attacker, or block the attacker. And if none of those are possible, then it's a mate. So with knight to e6 check, the king, you can't block a knight because they jump over pieces. There's no way to capture the knight, so the king will have to run, and the only place he can run to is here. So now, looks like our rook can deliver a mate there. All right, so try and figure that out in your head. And remember, when you're doing tactics problems, try and do as much in your head as you can, because, you know, at a game or in a normal game, you can't take moves back, and you know, if you make a mistake, that's it. You could end up losing. So here we go. Knight checks, king runs, and we mate with the rook here, protected by the bishop. All right, 5 down. We'll try and do at least 5 more. A knight has jumped forward here, attacking our bishop. What do we have? Is there a way to get at a vulnerable king? Or take advantage. If you can't checkmate the king, the vulnerable king, there might be another pattern where you can take advantage of the vulnerability of the king and use it to gain some material. So looks like we have a pair of bishops and a knight for both sides. We're behind by a pawn. So checks first. If we try to check here with the knight, or here, the knight can be captured. So maybe that doesn't work. So if checks don't work, let's look at captures. Now, pause if you need more time to think. If not, I believe I found the answer here. And we're going to capture the knight. And then if queen captures, we can fork king and queen, regaining the queen back, and we'll go ahead a knight after that. So we just want to make sure, if we're going to do that, if we're going to take this knight with our queen, that there isn't a surprise in between move. Yeah, I don't really see anything. They could check us. But then we could just block with our queen. So that is what we're doing. Capture, capture, and then the fork here. And then we pick off the queen. And we go ahead and knight there for a pawn. All right, on to the next one. Oh, we just had a knight captured by a pawn. We're looking for a vulnerable king pattern, and we have one. And this is a great pattern to know here. I've mentioned it in past videos. If you are able to check a king with a queen on one of the squares around the king, there are different patterns to know. So here, you know, if white's turn to move, you're looking for any checks first. Now, if we capture with the pawn, the king can just run to here. So what if we capture with the queen? So if we do that, the queen is on a pawn, or excuse me, on a square after it captures that pawn around the king, and it will cover a lot of squares. Now, if it was wide open, the queen would cover here, here, and here, and the only two squares the queen could not cover usually are E7 and F6 here. But there are other pawns, so we have to make sure everything is covered. So once we capture right here, the queen will prevent the king from escaping along that diagonal, and the knight is covering that square, preventing escape, and then black's other pieces, and the pawn, of course, covers the knight and the queen. So we'll have a mate. There you have it. And this is a great pattern to know. Whenever the queen is protected and checks the king diagonally, when it's right next to the king, the queen covers all these squares. So the only two you have to worry about, unless something's blocking your path, like this pawn on d6, you just have to make sure the opposite squares on the side are covered there. All right, on to the next problem. Pawn is pushed forward. What can we do here? Hmm. Well, if we're looking for a vulnerable king pattern, there's no way to even get to that king at the moment. We might have to sacrifice something. So checks first. You want to look at those. We don't have any checks possible. Captures. Well, normally when you're looking for captures, you want to look for unprotected pieces. But the only thing we can capture looks to be this pawn that was just pushed forward. So maybe that'll open things up. If we capture and they recapture, our queen would be able to deliver a check. So that could be an interesting threat. So let's take a closer look at that. Capture. Pawn recaptures. Our queen delivers a check from h4. The king can, remember, the three options: capture, and that's not possible, so block or run. If the pawn blocks, well, then we can capture the pawn in the center with check, and then we're threatening, we're forking the king and the rook, so that's good. But now if we look at the problem again, if we go here, they capture, we check. What if they don't block with this pawn on g2? What if the king moves up? Well, then, we could come over and capture the pawn, checking the king. The king would have to run again. Okay, so we go here and check. The king's forced to run here. And then we could check the king with a fork on the other rook. All right, so that looks to be the way to go. All right, and so they block. Now we can check and pick off the rook over here. We just have to watch out, though, that we're not trapped. Our queen could get trapped over there. I mean, we go here. An option, see, now we're attacking the knight. The knight could just develop. And then the queen is kind of trapped in there. And that could be dangerous, but, they don't. That's not in the scope of this problem. That's something you could take a look at if you feel like it. If not, let's move on to the next problem. We just had a pawn pushing forward, protecting the bishop and attacking the queen at the same time. But it has left a vulnerability here. So, checks first. Take a look at it. Hopefully you found the answer here. This move has created weaknesses around the king. And with the help of the knight, covering everything, now we just have to find a way to check this king. And you definitely want to look for checks if the king is in a stalemated position. Not an actual stalemate, but it can't move. So the knight is cutting off the king from being able to move forward on these diagonals. And the king's own pieces are blocking him in. So the king is trapped if we could just deliver a check. So hopefully you found, you don't want to go here, of course, or the rook will capture you. But you're able to deliver a check here. And the king cannot capture us, block, or run. And it'll be a mate. All right, on to the next one. Okay, knight has pushed forward here. What is happening? Well, knight is targeting our knight, but if we want to look for a vulnerable king position or pattern, Well, we have different options here. I mean, you want to look for checks first. So that's an option. Check. The king could choose to move up. But then what do we do? All right, so the king just moves up, and then, do we even have a follow-up? All right, so maybe we capture. Then bishop captures. Then we capture over here, pulling the king away from the defense of this bishop, and we capture there with check. That might be something to consider. Let's look at the material, though. 5 pawns versus 5. Okay, so maybe that's the way to go. All right, yeah, so maybe we do that. We capture, they capture. We pick this pawn off. If the king captures, the king doesn't have to capture, though, but then we would just go ahead a pawn. But here's something we have to look at. If we capture, they capture, and then we go here. Okay, we are in check, so I don't know. That looks like we'll get some advantage there. So capture. All right, they don't like that. All right, so maybe they want us to go that way with the check. Capture is not possible because of our knight. So the king, if we capture with check, the king's probably going to come forward. Then we take the knight. So maybe I did the order wrong. We take the knight. They recapture. All right, maybe that's what they want. Now we could just pick off the knight here. Nope, they don't like that. All right, what are we trying to do here? Sacrifice with the rook? Nope, they don't like that. Oh, okay. Well, we could fork. Okay, if we fork, the king captures, then we capture. And then our knight will be trapped. Actually, no, because then our rook will be able to capture the pawn and protect it. All right, yeah, that one was a little more complicated. So here we go. And it looks like our, if he goes here, our knight could be trapped, but we can just capture here and protect the knight. But then we have to find a way to get that knight out of there, so that's a little tricky. All right, anyway, that's 10 problems. I set those up from 500 to 1500. Maybe I'll do another video and bump the difficulty up a little bit, although that last one was a little bit trickier. Some of them were pretty easy. So let me know what you think. Feel free to leave comments. I always like hearing from viewers and subscribers, and also like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.